My name is Paige Ingram, and I was 34 years old on the morning my mother sent me a message before the sun had even started to peek over the trees. There was no good morning. There was no asking how I was doing or how my little business was going. It was just a demand, the kind of cold, flat message you'd expect from a bill collector or a stranger at a government office. What made it strange was that by that point in my life, I had already paid the mortgage on my parent home 96 times. Every single month for 8 years, the money had left my account without fail, quietly keeping the roof over their heads while they slept. But in their will, the legal document that decides who gets what when a person passes, my name did not appear once, not even in a footnote. I found out by a total accident while sorting through a folder of papers they had asked me to help organize, and when I read it, I had to read it again just to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks on me. Then I walked out to my car and sat in the silence for a full hour. What I decided to do after that hour was something none of them ever saw coming. Understand how any of this happened. You have to go back 8 years, to a winter when my parents almost lost everything. My father, Raymond, had stopped working early because his back gave out at the factory where he'd spent most of his life. My mother, Carol, had stayed home her whole life to raise a family and keep the house. They had borrowed money against the house twice when times felt easier, and they had spent that cash. But then the monthly payments grew bigger, and their savings started to disappear like water through a crack in the floor. I was 26 years old when I got the call on a Tuesday afternoon. The bank had sent a letter saying they were going to take the house away. My mother read it to me over the phone like she was reading a recipe she didn't understand, and I drove out there that same night. We sat at the kitchen table with that letter between us, and the only real solution was a new loan. The bank would not give money to 2 retired people with no paycheck and damaged credit. They needed someone with a real business and a clean financial history. They needed me. A lawyer helped us arrange the deal, and he was careful. He told me that too many grown children sign away their security for nothing and end up hurt later. So he structured everything in a way that protected me. That afternoon, my parents signed a deed that gave me the majority share of the house, because I was the one bringing the cash to clear the old debt and taking the new loan entirely in my name. I walked out of that office as both the primary borrower and the majority owner. The percentages were written in plain numbers on the paper. My father called it just paperwork. My mother called it a blessing from God. I called it a way to keep my parents safe. I put that folder in a fireproof box and didn't think much more about it. After that night, the monthly payment became my responsibility without question. On the first of every month, $1,140 left my business account automatically. I paid the property taxes every year when they came due. I paid for a new water heater in the 3rd year and a new roof in the 6th. I gave my mother every receipt, and she would pat my hand and tell me I was such a good girl. My younger brother Eric lived an hour away in the opposite direction from me, and somehow the distance seemed to make his phone stop working whenever something needed to be done or paid for. When the water heater broke, they called me. When Eric needed parts for his car, they called me too. I told myself this was just what a good daughter does. I told myself a lot of things during those 8 years. Eric was the only one they ever talked about at the dinner table. He was sensitive, they said. He was still finding himself. He quit 4 jobs in a single year, and my father said the boy just hadn't found a right chance yet. When Eric couldn't make rent, my parents asked me to send money for him. I did. Somehow, in their minds, that became a loan they made to their son, rather than something I paid out of my own pocket. I saw the pattern clearly, the way an accountant always eventually spots what doesn't add up. I tried bringing it up gently during the holidays, suggesting maybe we could split the costs more fairly. My mother would look wounded and change the subject to the food on the table. My father would say that families shouldn't count every penny. I let it go every single time. I didn't want to fight, and I also knew the loan had my name on it. If I stopped paying, my own credit would be destroyed, and they would lose the house. So I stayed the reliable one. I thought reliable was a good thing to be. It took me 8 years to understand it was just a job title they gave me without telling me the salary, or that there wasn't one this past spring. My father had a heart attack in the garden on a Sunday. My mother called me before she even called an ambulance, And that one detail tells you more about how that household worked than anything else I could say. I drove those 50 minutes faster than I should have. He survived and had a small procedure on his heart. He spent 4 days in the hospital. And when he came home, the doctors gave him a thick stack of medical papers that nobody in that house was ever going to read carefully. So I read them. I organized his medications into a weekly pill box and called the cardiologist's office to understand every prescription. I did what I always did. Because my parents had been frightened by how close it all came, they decided it was time to write a proper will with a lawyer. My mother handed me a grocery bag full of old papers and asked me to sort through them. Because I was good at that. I sat at my own kitchen table that night with a glass of wine and that bag of papers. I found bank statements, insurance cards, and the house deed I already knew well. At the very bottom was a fresh envelope from the lawyer, not even sealed. I told myself not to look, but I did. I had never once regretted reading documents until that night. It was their will, signed just 2 weeks after my father had come home from the hospital, while I was still managing his medications and fighting with the pharmacy to get his prescriptions filled on time. I looked for my name, and it wasn't there. The house, the land, the truck, the money I had helped him save over 8 years, and my mother's jewelry, all of it was going to Eric. There was one sentence about me. It said that their daughter had been provided for during their lifetimes and therefore would receive nothing further. Provided for. I had made 96 house payments, and the sum total of their acknowledgement was one sentence, saying I had already had enough that I didn't cry. People expect a daughter to cry at something like that, but I didn't. I sat very still and felt something shift inside me, like finally finding the mistake in a long column of numbers. I put the will back in the envelope, filed it neatly, and poured my wine down the sink. I wanted to remember that moment with a completely clear head. I went to the next Sunday dinner and said nothing. I needed to understand the whole picture first. My mother made a roast. Eric was there with his girlfriend Brittany, who was now his fiancée. The conversation turned to the house, as it always did. Eric mentioned that he and Brittany were thinking about moving in to help out, now that Dad was dealing with his health. My mother was glowing. My father said it made sense to keep the home and the family for the next generation. I asked him what he meant by family. He didn't even look up from his plate. He just said the home goes to the son. That's how it has always been done, the same way you comment on the weather. My mother nodded and reached for the gravy. Eric smiled like the decision had already been made. I passed the potatoes and asked about the next doctor's appointment and drove home with his words repeating in my head. That night, I sat at my computer and made 2 lists. The first was every payment I had ever made, mortgage, taxes, repairs, money sent to Eric. The total was well over 6 figures. The second list was what I had been promised in return. That list was completely empty. There had never been a promise at all, just an unspoken understanding that I would always be there to pay. I am not a person who enjoys drama. I wasn't going to send an angry letter or make a scene at dinner. If I did that, they would only call me ungrateful. So I did the one quiet thing available to me. I opened my banking app, found the automatic payment I had set up 8 years earlier, and turned it off. No phone call, no warning, just silence where the money used to be. IT took 11 days for my mother to call. She skipped the hello and went straight to telling me the bank had called about a late payment, and there must be a mistake with my account. I told her there was no mistake. I had stopped the payment. The silence on the line stretched out long before she started crying. She always cried when things didn't go her way. She said we were a family, and families take care of each other. She said she didn't know what was wrong with me. I asked her if my father's will took care of the family equally. She paused and then said the will was his business and had nothing to do with the mortgage, that you don't keep score with your parents. I almost laughed because keeping score is literally what I do for a living. For 8 years, I was the only person in that family not keeping track. I told her I loved her and hung up. Eric called the next day, sounding like a man who had never once worried about a utility bill in his life. He told me our mother was a wreck and asked what my problem was. He brought up our father's heart, suggesting the stress I was causing could make him sick again. He was trying to use my love for my father as a lever. I told him I was very familiar with our father's heart condition because I was the one who had read all the medical paperwork. He told me that even though I had sent money over the years, I wasn't really there for him the way he was, that he gave them his time while I just sent checks from a distance. I thought about who drove to the hospital at a moment's notice and who organized the medications. But I didn't say it out loud. I just asked him if he would like to begin paying the mortgage on the house he was going to inherit. He laughed and told me to stop being dramatic. Then, by accident, I was added to a group text that included my parents, Eric, and Brittany. I read the messages before anyone noticed I was there. Brittany said they could begin renovations in the spring. My mother wrote that I would come around because I always felt guilty eventually. Eric sent a laughing emoji and said I would fold before Christmas because I couldn't help myself. My father wrote that once the house was Eric's, this would stop being my problem anyway. They were talking about me like a line item in a budget, not like a daughter. I took photographs of every message. Then Eric noticed I was in the group and removed me, but I already had what I needed. That night, I opened my fireproof box and read the deed from 8 years ago. It was clear as daylight. I was a majority owner. My father could write whatever he liked in his will, but you can only give away what you actually own. He was trying to give away something that was mostly mine. I called a lawyer I trusted named Gwen, and she confirmed everything. She gave me 3 options. I could force a sale of the property. I could buy out my parents' share, or I could simply let the truth come out on its own. I chose the third path. With a little extra that on a Tuesday morning, my mother sent the text that became the last straw. No hello, just the mortgage is due. I looked at those 4 words and thought about 96 payments and 1 sentence and was saying I had already received enough. I replied with 1 line of my own. Everything goes to Eric, so does the mortgage. Then I turned my phone face down and drank my coffee while it was still warm. And why mother called a Sunday dinner and invited relatives and neighbors too. She wanted an audience, people around her who would make me feel too embarrassed to hold my ground. I wanted an audience as well, for completely different reasons. I asked my cousin Dana, the only family member who had called to hear my side, to come and sit quietly in the back with her phone ready. I spent Saturday night making 3 copies of the deed and a full summary of every payment I had ever made. I also brought the letter from my lawyer. I wasn't planning to give a speech. I was just going to show them the facts and let the facts do the work. When I arrived, there were 6 cars in the driveway. The house smelled like roast beef. Eric stood at the front of the room asking the gathered family if they could believe I would put my own parents on the street. I didn't raise my voice. I said nobody was being put on the street. Then I opened my folder and handed copies of my aunt to the neighbors and to my father. I told them that 8 years ago I had saved this house when the bank had turned my parents away. I told them I had paid 96 times. I pointed them to the deed. I explained that it cannot transfer ownership of something that doesn't belong to the person writing it. The room went completely quiet. Eric shouted that the papers were a trick. My mother cried and said I had taken advantage of her, but the neighbor, who worked in insurance and understood legal documents, looked at the deed and told my mother it was a real and binding legal record. That changed the air in the room. When the noise settled, I gave them 3 choices. They could stay in the house under a new legal agreement where costs were split fairly. I could buy out their share and they could move somewhere else. Or, if the house was truly meant for Eric, then Eric could begin paying the mortgage the following month. My mother said I was treating the family like a business transaction. I agreed that family shouldn't keep a ledger, but the bank absolutely does, and my name is the one at the top of that account. Then I stood up, left the lawyer's letter on the table, and drove home. They took 3 weeks to decide. They chose the first option because my mother could not bear to leave. We now have a legal agreement that spells out exactly who pays what. Eric refused to contribute anything, so he moved out. Brittany's renovation board disappeared from the app. My aunt told the rest of the family the real version of the story, and people stopped bringing casseroles to my poor, mistreated parents. I still visit the house. I still help manage my father's medications, because that is simply who I am. My mother and I talk carefully around each other now, like something fragile that has been repaired, but still shows the cracks. Eric and I don't speak, and I have made my peace with that. On the 1st of every month, My phone stays quiet. I finally stopped paying for a seat at a table where I was never truly welcome. I learned that love is not something you can purchase with 140 payments. And I learned that you have every right to stop signing your name to a bill that no one else ever intended to share.